Thank you so much, Karen. That was wonderful. She made the impossible look so effortless and so beautiful. You will have the opportunity to ask some questions of both speakers at the end of the event. When I was putting together my introductory remarks for tonight, I realized one unexpected coincidence that connects Karen Solie and Esi Edugyan. Both of them studied at the University of Victoria, the institution where I began my own academic career and where I taught for many years. Esi studied in the creative writing program at UVic under the mentorship of Jack Hodgins. I hadn't had the chance to cross paths with her at the time. In fact, it was another student who is now a colleague of mine here at the U of T, Karina Vernon, who first brought to my attention The Second Life of Samuel Tyne, the first novel by Esi, published in 2004. I couldn't put it down. It was not just beautifully written. Highly atmospheric, it takes the Gothic elements that have long characterized a big part of Canadian literature toward new directions. It is also a powerful iteration of a part of Canadian prairie history that has been, at least until recently, largely obscured in official narratives. In this first novel, Esi, who was born in Calgary, pays homage to her family's origins from Ghana, but does so by focusing both on her character's present moment and on the history of Black people on the prairies. Samuel and his wife, Maud, arrived in Calgary from Ghana in the 1950s. He is a civil servant who was educated in Oxford, eager to accomplish great things, but his ambitions are stifled by the routine of his job. Nevertheless, he is given the opportunity to start anew when he inherits the dilapidated farm of an uncle. While he looks into the future, a second life, as it were, the town of Astor, where they moved to, compels him to engage with the past. Astor, based on the real town of Amber Valley in Alberta, not too far from Edmonton, was founded around 1910 by Black settlers, freed slaves from Oklahoma. The Second Life of Samuel Tyne announces Esi's deep interest in the diasporic experience, specifically Black history and diaspora in Canada. Esi has read from her work in literary festivals all over the world, from South Africa to China, and has held residencies in Iceland, Budapest, Germany, and Belgium. Her nonfiction book, Dreaming of Elsewhere, Observations on Home, published in 2014, is an eloquent and powerful address to the right to belong, a kind of ode to citizenship as an experience of power, as an expression of power. It was during her time as writer in residence in Stuttgart, Germany, in 2006, that her deep personal and intellectual interests in these issues prompted her to write a second novel. She came upon a reference to the Rhineland bastards, the offspring of white German women and Black French colonial soldiers born during and after France's occupation of the Rhineland, right after the First World War. Mixed-race Germans that came of age during the Third Reich. This inspired her second novel, Half-Blood Blues, whose success has been absolutely phenomenal. Published in 2011, it is a novel full of music, driven by the passions and aspirations of the members of a jazz band, and it revolves around Hieronymus, Hiero, the half-breed from Rhineland. He is a prodigious trump player, the key member of a popular jazz band that is, however, forbidden to play live in Berlin in the 1930s, because the Nazis have declared that kind of music decadent. Hiero, along with the two Black American members of the group, Sid and Chip, escapes to occupied Paris in 1939, only to be arrested by the Nazis. The story is told through the voice of Sid in the 1990s. He's a charismatic, albeit untrustworthy narrator who recounts his time in Berlin and Paris. Half-Blood Blues accomplished what few novels do. It was simultaneously nominated for the most prestigious literary prizes, both in Canada and overseas. It was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, the Scotia-Giller Prize, Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize, the Walter Scott Prize, and the Governor General's Award for Fiction, among others. It won the Giller, the Orange Prize for Fiction, the Ethel Wilson Award for Fiction, and the Anisfield Wolf Book Award, an American prize that recognizes books that make a major contribution to our understanding of racism. It is a novel about music making and the making of documentaries, about race and belonging, about remembering and misremembering, deep friendships and betrayals, spoken in the captivating rhythms of Sid's American patois. It is a stunning accomplishment, and it is with great pleasure that I would like to welcome its author tonight, Esi Edugyan.
Great. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and thank you all for coming out this evening. I know it's not always pleasant to have to come out when it's been rainy and dark and wretched, so it's nice to see you all. I'd also like to thank the U of T for inviting me to give this lecture this evening, in particular Professor Kamboureli. So thank you. And it's an honor to be sharing the stage with the wonderful Karen Solie, whose work I've admired for so many years, and it's quite a thrill to meet her as well. So thank you so much, Karen. So my talk this evening is called The Wrong Door, Some Meditations on Solitude and Writing. It is among the most fabled interruptions in all of literature. After an opium-induced reverie, Samuel Taylor Coleridge regained his senses to discover that an entire poem had written itself in his consciousness. It was one of those stunning and rare visitations, the whole and complete knowledge of a work. And with great urgency, he sat at his desk to transcribe what had already been fully expressed within him. He had just written down the 54th line when there came a knock at the door. A person come on business from nearby Porlock. The man would detain him for more than an hour, and when Coleridge was finally let alone again, his recollections had completely vanished. He retained only the gist of the poem, a vague assembly of words, a wavering idea, a few scattered lines. The rest, as he put it, passed away like the images on the surface of a stream into which a stone has been cast. And so the great Kubla Khan was destroyed at the very moment of its making. Except that it probably didn't happen like that. Coleridge himself was known to embroider and invent. The crucial letter from a friend, for instance, that interrupts the 8th chapter of his Biographica Literaria, was in fact written by the author himself. In the case of our person from Porlock, some scholars have suggested that Coleridge merely invented him to explain away the fragmentary nature of his great poem. Yet whether a bogey, an unexpected occurrence, or an actual flesh and blood man, every writer fears these people from Porlock, which is to say that we fear the sudden, thought-scattering disruptions that hurt our work. Indeed, these days, such disruptions seem the rule. One wants to board up the doors and dim the lights. One wants to drop the blinds, bind the shutters, and mount a sign at the entrance saying, "The wrong door." I would like to speak tonight about the notion of silence and of its necessary role in creation. I would also like to speak about privacy, which is something other than silence, but it's near relative, I think. Such notions may seem straightforward at first glance, but in a world where our ideas of selfhood and privacy are ever shifting, an examination of their role in creation seems valuable. Now, how do we define silence? What is this great void we strive towards? The Oxford English Dictionary defines silence as the state or condition when nothing is audible, the absence of all noise and sound, muteness, taciturnity. I will come back to this last, curiously personal definition soon enough. For the artist, I would add that silence is the state of being deep within oneself. It is the act of cutting out externals so that one may hear the internal. In this way, to greater and lesser degrees, Coleridge's reverie is how all art gets made. We open a door within ourselves and we leave it open so that the unexpected and the unknown may fill us. I realize that this nears the language of the sacred, but that seems fitting, as there is something of the sacrosanct in the act of writing. We take what is percolating and unformed, and through some mysterious process, turn the void into utterance. The word lost is derived from the Old Norse word los, which literally means the disbanding of an army. This conjures images of men breaking apart their known connections, taking their leave, stepping away into the unknown, alone. This strikes me as the perfect metaphor for writing. We must go away alone and allow ourselves to become lost, and in this way, open ourselves to the new and miraculous. There is a second kind of solitude, a solitude other than the silence that we carve out for ourselves amidst the roar of the greater world. It is needed if an artist is to stand behind his work, even in the face of the fiercest attacks. It is the solitude of certainty. There is a wonderful story that I think speaks to this necessity. In 1572, the Renaissance artist Paolo Veronese was called before the Holy Office at Venice to defend himself against charges of blasphemy. He had painted a portrait of the Last Supper, and along with the usual figures that we expect to see in such a work, he had included random people in the background, dawdlers and loafers, men rambling by. There were people thoughtlessly scratching themselves, people with horrifying deformities, a man staggering with a nosebleed. These images, it was charged, had no place in a sacred painting. Asked why he would depict such things, the artist replied, "I thought these things might happen." Now, it hardly seems a viable defense, but as an artistic statement, it is enormously resonant. Veronese, in his few words, was arguing for the idea that the principal role of art is to depict the world at hand faithfully, and this includes what is unsavory and ugly. Anything less than this is hagiography or caricature. My second novel, Half-Blood Blues, is about young American and jazz musicians trying to survive and ultimately leave Europe on the eve of World War II. These are men who have lived through disappointment and violence, who have seen the people around them given to their worst impulses for hatred, who in some ways are only still alive because of the desperate bond between them. Their language reflects this special intimacy, as well as the features of their particular world, and it is riddled with slang and vulgar jokes and profanity. Touring during the novel's year of release, I was always surprised to sometimes encounter readers who felt betrayed. These were people who were troubled by my use of coarse language. It should not have startled me as it did, to be questioned about it. We all have our limits, and they are as diverse and as fascinating as ourselves. But I was always left fumbling, searching for the words that would acquit me, that would allow me to explain that in fact I had striven for something authentic and meaningful. I left these evenings feeling unsettled. It was only one morning when I was approached by a man who very thoughtfully, very calmly explained how I had upset his mother, that I found myself thinking it through. And if it is true that every reader has a favorite book, it is equally true that every book has a favorite reader. We write for everyone and fail to please across the board. And as artists, we must make our peace with the idea that this is all right, that in fact, it is a welcome sign that we have challenged people, at least in the comfort of their sensibilities. I thought these things might happen, and so I wrote about them as faithfully as I could. This place of conviction can sometimes be lonely, but the work is all the truer for it. Finally, I would like to speak about privacy, about its role in creation. Privacy is defined as the state or condition of being alone, undisturbed, or free from public attention, as a matter of choice or right, freedom from interference or intrusion. It is interesting to note that the Chinese word that may come closest to the English word privacy, "shi," means selfish. And indeed, there is that quality to it, a turning inward that is necessarily a rejection of others, the uncompromised protection of a sphere of silence from the violating whims of others. In our era of Twitter and Facebook, notions of privacy are being shaped and reshaped by the hour, with some arguing that we live in a post-privacy world. The internet yields all sorts of knowledge we are no better off for knowing. The German futurist and film critic Christian Heller found himself relinquishing everything to this brave new world. He created a live site in which every quotidian detail of his existence was relayed online. Quote, "Privacy as a guaranteed personal space free from outside view is shrinking," he explained. Long-term privacy will survive only as an exception, as a special case in everyday life. It was his belief that our only recourse is to confront the loss of privacy directly. One could read about what he ate that morning, how long it took him to get to work, etc., etc. There were even links to his bank accounts, in which all of his personal financial data was available for viewing. It was a staggering act of public intimacy, and like all long intimacies, gradually yielded to a wearying sense of banality. I would argue that, above every other intrusion and interruption, it is a loss of privacy that has the greatest ability to destroy an artist. The knock at the door, the boiled-over kettle, the newborn's cry. For most, not for Coleridge, of course, these interruptions are surmountable because they are fleeting. They are nothing when compared with the irrevocable loss of a much-needed private sphere of creation. I think it would come as a surprise to most readers to learn that writers in their middle to late careers regard with nostalgia their days of obscurity. I remember being puzzled when a writing professor sat us down and told us to savor our collegiate days because our motives for writing would never again be this pure. We dismissed her as sour and jaded and longed for the days when we would see our words bound and prominently displayed in the local chapters. How frustrated we were by that advice. So much of her meaning seemed to reflect her own anxieties over reviews and prize nominations. But I understand now, too, that what she was speaking of was a certain lack of privacy, a certain public spotlight that can begin to erode not only our artistic confidence, but even motive, the very impetus for writing in the first place. I have spoken to a German writer who, after publishing an international bestseller 13 years ago, struggles to write, paralyzed by the idea of tarnishing his own reputation with an unlikable follow-up. I have spoken to an American writer who was so badly shamed for an extra-literary occurrence that she cannot bring herself to enter again the public sphere. All of these tragedies are tragedies of exposure, and they speak to the very fundamental need for an area of silence, a room of, yes, one's own. As an extreme example, consider the fate of Elena Ferrante. For those of you unfamiliar with Ferrante, she is the pseudonym of an Italian novelist famous for her, or possibly his, cycle of Neapolitan novels, which take as their fundamental subject the friendship between two bright girls in the harsh and limited world of 1950s Italy. The novels are brash and intelligent and full of knowing and utterly authentic situations. All of this creativity was taking place under the dome of the most strict obscurity. The only thing that the public knew about Ferrante was that she was likely a woman, and even that was unverifiable. In the very few interviews that she had given, Ferrante had suggested that her very anonymity was crucial to her artistic process. Only under the cover of a pseudonym did she feel liberated enough to write with honesty. Said Ferrante via an email interview. Once I knew that the book would make its way in the world without me, once I knew that nothing of the concrete, physical me would ever appear beside the volume, as if the book were a little dog and I were its master, it made me see something new about writing. I felt as though I had released myself. I felt as though I had released the words from myself. Then, in the fall of 2016, the dreaded knock came at the door in the form of a journalist called Claudio Gatti. In an investigative feat that enraged many, he revealed the likely author of the Neapolitan novels to be a Rome-based translator with some probable input from her novelist husband. Gatti was said to have been blindsided and shocked by the vehemence of the public's reaction. He claimed that he believed he was doing a public good, as Ferrante was slated to release a slim volume of memoirs, which he had now revealed for a lie. Instead, he was castigated and jeered at on social media, cast unrecognizably to himself as the person from Porlock, a lumbering, unthinking agent of creative destruction. It is hard to know what to make of this man, Gatti. If he is sincere, then what he failed to understand was that the public had already consented to be lied to long ago. Indeed, the social contract between Ferrante and her readers was such that we accepted her constructed identity with all its attendant untruths. She had never claimed to have been born Elena Ferrante. We did not hold her to the fixity of that identity. We allowed her the fluidity to be what she needed to be, where, in her relentless silence, we heard a voice, a true, authentic voice. Gatti saw only that last, curious definition of silence, taciturnity, as if there were some personal spite in her desire to remain out of the public eye. Perhaps the greatest revelation to come out of the controversy was the frightening realization of how far we have come from our cultural consensus that privacy is a fundamental right. Given the way of the world now, how do we best find solitude and preserve it? We cannot all be Elena Ferrante. Is there a way that the interruptions of the world might actually make us better, stronger in our craft? It is possible. The answer, I think, lies in acceptance. The more we fight distractions, try to shake off their grip, the harder we are pressed. It is best to let go, to know that the mob will find you, however you hide. Survival lies in understanding the varieties of solitude, knowing what is available to us and what is out of our hands. It is in accepting that the void is sometimes an echo chamber and knowing it will pass. It is trusting that the silence still exists out there beyond the spectacle, and that despite the noise, the words are still in us, waiting to be made whole. Thank you very much.
I knew I was not knocking on the wrong door when I invited Esi to give us a talk tonight. I'm going to invite Karen and Esi to join me on the stage. We're going to have a short dialogue, and then you will have the opportunity to ask questions yourselves. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the volunteers, my student volunteers, who have been wonderful. Evangeline, Tavleen, Kyle, Max, Catherine, Nicole. I hope I'm not forgetting anyone. And of course, the staff in the English office and the theater here. And I want to remind you that the books of the two authors are available outside for sale. And as Karen said, poetry is not useless, may not have use value, but it's very valuable. So I would like to encourage you to buy books and have the authors sign the books for you. Please